How are y'all doing? Good, good. Pleasant? Blessed. Yes, we're all blessed. And we're grateful to be here on this as we continue our Novena. Standing at the foot of the cross, our Mother Mary, seeing what she saw, the terrible destruction, the horrible violence done to her own child. That must be a very, very difficult thing for a parent to go through. I have accompanied many families who have been through that type of horrible loss. And our Mother Mary, what is it that brought her through that? And I would also imagine, when she was looking at that, she had to be thinking, why? Why in the world is this happening? Isn't that the question that a lot of us ask in the midst of going through difficulties, pain, suffering, illness? Why is this going on? And what's that question that's always at the back of our mind as well? Why, Lord? Why, God, are you doing this? I want to turn to an Old Testament prophet that sheds an interesting light on this and proposes an answer which is ever so simple but also so significant and profound. Have you heard of Habakkuk? Sounds funny, right? Habakkuk. It's an Old Testament prophet. What is so significant and different about Habakkuk is this. If you read in the Old Testament the prophets, whether it's the major or the minor prophets, the role of the prophet is to be the voice of God and to deliver God's message to his people. Habakkuk, he did something a little bit different. The significance of this prophet is so different. His theology and his writings are very, very different from the other prophets. They spoke, again, of a need to not be disobedient, to go back to the covenant. But Habakkuk speaks of anger towards God. Anger. I think this represents many times those difficult moments in our lives. Whether or not we want to admit it, don't we get angry at God when we experience difficult moments? Why is God doing this to me? Mary, why did you do that? What is happening here? What have I done to deserve this? Why am I ill? Why is God punishing me? Let's listen to some of these words of Habakkuk from his first chapter. He says, this is his first line, "How long, O Lord? I cry for help, but you do not listen. I cry out to you, violence, but you do not intervene. Why do you let me see ruin? Why must I look at misery? Destruction and violence are before me. There is strife and clamorous discord." Then the Lord answered and said to me, "Write down the vision clearly on the tablets so that one can read it readily. For the vision still has its time, presses on to fulfillment, and will not disappoint. The rash one has no integrity, but the just one, because of his faith, shall live." Why do you let me see ruin and violence? The words of Habakkuk. Very, very interesting. How many times have we sat down to watch the news and think to yourself of all these terrible things that are going on. We still hear about murder in our cities, sexual abuse of children, terrorist attacks, and we're looking at this and we ask ourselves, how long, Lord? Why aren't you doing anything about this? Now, if we recall the context of all the prophets in the Old Testament, they are lamenting the loss of the kingdom under King David. Their kingdom split. They had internal strife. Look at what happens when we fight amongst ourselves. They're reminding the people that perhaps the reason for their distress is the disobedience and indifference towards God. But Habakkuk is looking at the surrounding political realities, the Babylonians, the Chaldeans. They have become a threat. And he's saying, why? Why is this happening? We worship you, the one true God, yet you are surrounding us with these people who worship a million other gods and are being very, very destructive and terrible to us. We can look to the presence of political realities that threaten our own well-being too, even though our status as a world power is very strong. But the pressure of terrorism is in our cities, and trying to make amends and trying to speak with rogue nations. What can we do? Sometimes we can live in fear. And in the time of Habakkuk, the Babylonian Empire represented things that were very similar to our very own peace and security as well. Makes sense that Habakkuk was saying, why is this going on? Now, if you continue to read his prophecy, this is where it gets mind-boggling. It states that God is not only allowing Babylonians and terrible things to continue to exist, but that God is actually enabling horrible behavior to continue. It says it here. Let me read it to you. Habakkuk, chapter 1, verses 5 through 8. Look at the nations and see, be utterly amazed, for a work is being done in your days that you would not believe were it to be told. I'm going to raise up the Babylonians, that bitter and impulsive people who march the breadth of the land and take dwellings that are not their own. They are terrifying and dreadful. Their right and their exalted position are of their own making. I allow them to continue. All of them come for violence. They scoff at kings. They laugh at any fortresses. Then they sweep through like the wind and vanish and take everything. This is God speaking to Habakkuk, and it's almost too much to contain. God is basically saying, yes, I'm aware of how terrible things are, and I'm using them for a divine purpose. This seems to fly in the face of a merciful God, doesn't it? This seems to fly in the face of a Jesus who's come to save us. We can ask the same thing today. Just like Habakkuk was saying to God about those terrible Babylonians, we look at our own pleas for violence to end and for terrible things just to stop, and we ask God, why don't you make this stop? Lord, don't you know how terrible things are? Do something about this. God's response to us is this, and this is the point of Habakkuk. I know what's going on. I don't cause terrible things to happen. I'm the God of all creation. I'm very aware of how my own creatures can rebel against me and choose not to do good. All we have to do is look at the cross and be reminded of that. Now, keep in mind, God does not create chaos in order to pick on us. We create chaos on our own. God is always a God who acts in a just way, but whose good intentions for us can sometimes confuse us and confound us. Maybe that's what Mary was thinking. What is going on here? But our God is a God of active and mysterious providence, and this is crucial for us to understand. God is always about the purpose of doing good things for us, but often in ways that can be very profounding and confounding to us. Again, look at the cross. How many of us wear the cross? An act of terrible destruction and violence. God is the God of all things and seeks out in all things, good and bad, the ultimate good for his creatures. God is in charge, and God is working his good purpose out. What makes a right attitude for us is that one line at the beginning of Habakkuk's prophecy. He says, "But the just one, because of his faith, because of her faith, shall live." The right response to suffering is faith. That's the simple response. Faith is what brings us through. The example of Mary in today's gospel, she enabled her son, even though he didn't seem to want to do it, to perform his first miracle. People were moved to faith. His disciples were moved to faith because of that. Many came to believe. Look at the incredible experience that Mary had with the appearance of the angel before her. That incredible news, you're going to have a son. You're going to name him Jesus. And she's like, what? But she believed. She had faith. And she answered, "Here I am. I come to do your will." And that faith is what gave her consolation when she lost her son. That faith is what was with her when she was at the foot of the cross, seeing her son die. There's no finer example of faith, I believe, that we see in the life of Mary. She responded without even questioning, "Yes, I am the servant of the Lord." She enabled her son to help his disciples come to a point of belief in their life. So who is this Mary standing at the foot of the cross? Yes, a suffering woman looking at the tragedy before her, but she is a woman of faith. And she is the one who, with the disciples, came to the glory and the healing of the resurrection. And so, my dear brothers and sisters, this is what we are reminded of as we continue on our novena. We thank God for the gift of our faith that brings us through those difficult moments. Why is it that we want to gather around the table? To receive the very body and blood of Jesus, to strengthen our faith, to help us make sense of those times, and try to come to a place in our life to know that, yes, God is in control, and God can make good things happen from the terrible realities that can come about because of the choices that we sometimes make. May the Eucharist nourish our souls and ever strengthen our faith.